Bibles at Jeremiah chapter 39. Jeremiah chapter 39. Jeremiah chapter 39. We'll get back into our study of this book this evening. It wasn't all that painful, was it? Make it by 7. Since we are starting a half hour earlier now, I'm only permitting 2 yawns per evening before I call you out. And so, it used to be 3, but with the earlier start, I'm only permitting 2 per evening. And on the third one, then I'm going to have to name you and we'll have to deal with it. Jeremiah chapter 39. We've been studying this book, and we're finally reaching historically. Reaching the end. We're not quite to the end of the book, but we're kind of to the end of the historical background in relationship to the study, because we're at the time period of which king? Who's the last one before they're completely in captivity? Zedekiah. So that's where we're at here as we're moving forward, and we're actually how far into his reign here in chapter 39 to begin. Verse 1 says that in the 9th year, okay, that we begin there in the 9th year, and then he actually jumps ahead to which year, verse 2? And then in the 11th year. And so he talks, he doesn't really give us a lot about what happened in that 2-year span. He just kind of says we were at this point, and in the next breath we're in this point in time in history. Let me very quickly run the history with you, just because it's been a little while since maybe we've looked at it, and this might help you just recall how we got to where we are here with Zedekiah. We did this with you at the very beginning of our study, but that was like 4 months ago. And so let me remind you a few things from a historical standpoint of what we're dealing with in this time period. If you notice on the map that's on the chart in front of you, you can see that the Babylonian Empire is spreading and spreading and spreading. You recall, they're really the only group that seems to be able to resist them is who? Down here to the south. Egypt, right? In fact, Egypt tries at times to come up and help out up here at Jerusalem. They try to come up, and they'll get Babylon kind of distracted for a period of time. But ultimately, the Egyptians are going to come on back home, and Nebuchadnezzar is going to reconcentrate his efforts back here on Jerusalem. And they're going to have to deal with the finality, and that's what you're kind of dealing with here with Zedekiah in chapter 39. And so Babylon spread and spread and spread. The Assyrians were to the north. There was this continual strife between Assyria and Babylon. The Babylonians finally kind of take over the power, and they begin to spread this great empire in terms of its size and scope. And that includes ultimately Judea. But the reason they're able to take over Judea is because of whom? God. Because of God. That's the key that we've got to remember. Yes, they were powerful. Yes, they were able to nation build and empire build. But the reason they're able to take over Jerusalem and Judah is because that was what God determined should happen in relationship to them. If you recall very quickly some of the history that we've been dealing with, the Jews placed Josiah's son Jehoahaz on the throne. 3 months later, Necho put Jehoahaz's brother Jehoiakim, right? Remember, Jehoiakim was which one? He's the one that cut what?
Cut the scroll.
Right, he's the one that cut the scrolls up, okay? Jehoiakim was the king who, when Jeremiah used Baruch the scribe, wrote down the message. A main scribe heard it, went and told the princes. The princes said the king needs to hear this. Then go get Baruch and tell him to literally bring the message to us. And when the message was brought before Jehoiakim, he listened to about 3 or 4 leaves, the text said, I believe in chapter 36. And he takes those leaves of the message of God and cuts them up and throws them in the fire. And Jeremiah was told by God to do what? Write it down again. And then give him even more than what had originally been written. That's Jehoiakim, okay? And he had been placed on the throne when Jehoahaz had been taken away prisoner to Egypt. The Medes, the Median Empire to the north, the Babylonians are kind of just agreeing to coexist at this point. And so Babylon can concentrate its efforts south because they've got kind of an allegiance going to the north that hasn't created too much difficulties for them. Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, remember he's the great king, there's some overlap between his father and him in this time period, in the early stages of the captivity. But for the most part, Nebuchadnezzar's been in charge. Though his father was living at certain points in times that we've been dealing with, Nebuchadnezzar's pretty much been in charge of the Babylonian Empire throughout this period of time. And he's had not much trouble except with the idea of Egypt. But ultimately, they are victorious there as well. Jehoiahaz and Jehoiakim weren't very good guys. Not great kings. Jehoiakim was somewhat acceptant of Babylon and its rule until he got a little power hungry, thought he saw some weaknesses in Babylon, particularly when they were preoccupied with things coming out of Egypt. He begins to rebel, and what happens? That's right, he gets taken out of place. Okay, he gets taken out of rule. He rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar returns, and Jehoiakim is bound and killed. And Jehoiachin, his son, held out for about 3 months before he surrenders to Babylon as well. Babylonian armies then take away all the treasures from the temple at that point in time. Okay, we see this in periods of times from the palace. They gather the officials and the craftsmen of the city, and they take them away captive. And Zedekiah, who's the last one as we're leading into the finalities of the captivity, another son of Josiah, was set up as a puppet king over the remnant. And we say puppet king because he really didn't have any what? He didn't have any power. Okay, he's a figurehead. He's been put on that throne, that symbolic throne, but Nebuchadnezzar's in charge. Zedekiah was never really in charge of Judah. Zedekiah was never really in charge over that region in its fullness of senses. Number one, because God's going to bring them down, irregardless of what happens. And number two, Nebuchadnezzar's calling shots. And so he's really where all the power resides. This is the time period in which Ezekiel goes into captivity. If you're talking about the contemporaries in relationship to men like Daniel and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, Ezekiel would have headed into captivity in approximately this period of time. Jeremiah is one spokesman that is willing to tell the people what? He's the only one really willing to tell them the truth. Okay? He's the only one really willing to be honest and open. And when God says, this is what I want you to go tell them, what's Jeremiah do? He goes and tells them, right? He doesn't hide it. He doesn't change it. He doesn't manipulate it. He just goes and tells them exactly what God had told him to say. But very few, if any, would really listen to him. And ultimately, Babylon will come and destroy and level Jerusalem completely and take anything and everything that's left of any value, and eventually Jerusalem will become desolate in this process of time. So that's where we've headed to, okay? That's the history that was leading up to Zedekiah, who's now in charge. We're in the verse 2, the 11th year of Zedekiah's reign, in the 4th month, in the 9th day. Why do you think so specific? By yeah, big day in history to them. Okay, he wants the record to be straight of when this moment was, who was in charge, and what year it was happening in, and how all these events were occurring. There's a need for validity, if you will. There's need for validation from a historical perspective. And so Jeremiah records very specifically the time periods in which that they're dealing with. And on the 11th year, the 4th month, the 9th day, they make a what? Breach of the city. So after roughly 2 years of besieging the city, and you think about that, you can only imagine how number one, patient Babylon had to have been, and number two, how impatient inside Jerusalem you might be becoming, as you're just surrounded, no way in, no way out, nothing really happening except you're just being starved to death. If you recall, when Jeremiah sent to the court of the guard, he was basically told that he could have a what up until a certain point. He'd have bread until what? There wasn't any bread. Okay, he's supposed to get bread from the marketplace until there would be no bread to be found. And so this besiegement's lasting a long period of time, but eventually the Babylonians find a breach, and they're able to enter in the walled city. All the princes, verse 3, of the king of Babylon come in, and they sit in the middle gate. And he lists a bunch of them at the end of that verse. Verse 4, it comes to pass when Zedekiah the king of Judah and all the men of war saw them, what they do? Take off running. Okay. Where they flee and went forth out of the city by night by the way of the king's garden through the gate betwixt the two walls, and he went out toward the Arabah. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued after them and overtook Zedekiah in the plains of Jericho. And when they had taken him, they brought him up to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to Riblah in the land of Hamath, and he gave judgment upon him. And so, if we could go back for a minute, and I should have put this back in order for you. Just close your eyes for a second. It's going to fly before you. So I can get back to my larger map. There it is. But, so they're there in Jerusalem, and they try to flee out of this area. And they attempt to head towards what place? Of course, it's not going to be on this map. They try to head to Jericho. Okay? They try to head to Jericho, to the plains of Jericho. But are they able to escape? No. Okay. So they find like a gate between two walls near the king's palace. They think they found a place in the dark of night that they can kind of just sneak away. But they're spotted, apparently, seen, and they're pursued. And ultimately, they're caught as they try to escape out of Jerusalem. They're pursued, verse 5. They're overtaken in the plains of Jericho, and they're brought to King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to Riblah in the land of Hamath, and he gave judgment upon them. So I believe, if you look on this map, Riblah, see that where the hand is, that's Riblah, way up here to the north. Okay? And so here's Jerusalem down here. And so they capture him, Jericho area, and take him where the king is, up here to the north, in Riblah. And that's where he's going to be judged in that place. What's that?
I said that little hand.
Right there. There it is. Now it is, right there in Riblah. You know what's weird? Not on my screen. That's really odd. Not on my screen. It's right on, and it's because I've blown it up.
Yes.
So let's do this. Right there. That's Riblah. That's an unusual dilemma. I've never experienced that. I can't see behind me. So well to the north, where Nebuchadnezzar's waiting. And so Nebuchadnezzar's not down where? Point I want to make sure you notice. He's not standing outside the walls, okay? King's just waiting for it to be over, all right? He's not hanging out down there at Jerusalem while they besiege him. He doesn't know how long that's going to take or when they're going to be able to find a breach. And so the king doesn't spend 2 years waiting for his army to finally find a weakness and penetrate it. He waits, okay? He stays where it's much more comfortable. And so he's simply staying up there in Riblah. They bring him to judgment, I believe, there where the king is found.
That Riblah, Brian, wasn't it a center for the Babylonian control in that area?
Yeah, it seems to be a governmental location that they're using for Babylon as it oversees this region. And so there would be a reason why you would bring him there.
And that's a couple hundred miles.
Right. A centralized to them location for where that would be. So what happens there? That's more key.
Kill his son, put his eyes out.
Okay, so the king of Babylon slew the sons of Zedekiah in Riblah before his eyes. Also the king of Babylon slew all the nobles of Judah. That's a bad day. I don't mean that facetiously, I mean it literally. That's a bad, rough day. That's a lot of carnage and bloodshed. But Nebuchadnezzar, keep in mind, he's what? In relationship to all these nobles and people he keeps putting into power.
He's had it with him.
He's had it with them, okay? He's had it with them. He keeps giving them opportunities to have positions of leadership, and every single one of them does what?
Rebels.
Every one of them rebels. Okay? Sometimes God gives us all kinds of opportunities, and what do we often do with those opportunities?
Squander.
We rebel just as well sometimes. We rebel against what God is trying to offer and encourage and lead us in. And God's been trying to lead these people, and He keeps telling them through Jeremiah, submit, submit, submit to Babylon. Don't resist because it's not going to work. Don't try to fight because it's not going to work. And yet they continue to rebel and continue to rebel and continue to rebel. Nebuchadnezzar's done. So he has Zedekiah's family, sons killed, kills the nobles, and then what's he do? Okay. Takes out Zedekiah's eye. Symbolically is that what? What's the last thing he sees?
All these people killed.
Yeah. Okay. Before his eyes, it says in verse 6. So, King of Babylon slew the sons of Zedekiah in Riblah. Before his eyes also the king of Babylon slew all the nobles. Then he put Zedekiah's eyes out. The last imagery he has is all this death that ultimately he's what? He's responsible for. And in the private conversations we've already read between Jeremiah and Zedekiah, Zedekiah kind of knows what?
He knows Jeremiah's right.
Yeah, he knows Jeremiah's been right all along. But he's afraid of all these nobles and princes. He's been concerned about what they're going to think if he turns and changes his thought process. And so all that pride has kept him away from what's doing right. And now he's the one that could have turned the tide. And this is the last thing he sees. That which he caused because of his actions.
Well, Jeremiah had told him that he would be put to death. However, he actually suffered a fate worse than death,
Yeah.
if you really think about it.
Yeah.
Because he didn't listen to Jeremiah.
Right. And at this stage, what he's experiencing is far worse than death itself.
Do we have any record of how many children Zedekiah had?
Not that I'm aware of.
He was only 32 years old, so if he ain't quite two children like most kings did,
Yeah.
there was a lot of small children there that was killed.
Yeah. And considering the fact, as we noted Sunday in our study, he inherited what? From the prior kings. The harem, okay? He inherited the harem. He inherited all the concubines, okay? And so because if you remember, there was a moment in time where it said the women from the prior kings came out and said something, then his wives, then his actual personal wives. So there were lots of concubines, wives, and with them children. And so I don't know that we can know how many, but we can, I think, fairly ascertain there's a lot of people involved in that. Understanding that he would, in a sense, his family would have extended more beyond just his own physical children. It could have been the children, too, that belonged in his family line, not just the direct descendants of him. So the Chaldeans burned the king's house, in verse 8. The houses of the people with fire. They break down the walls of Jerusalem. Then Nebuzaradan, and don't be confused by that, different guy. Okay, that's not a misprint of Nebuchadnezzar. This is a captain of the guard, Nebuzaradan. The captain of the guard carried away captive into Babylon the residue of the people that remained in the city, the deserters also that fell away to him, and the residue of the people that remained. And so you've got a hodgepodge of people. You got some folks who had kind of already pledged their allegiance, if you will, to Babylon. You've got this residue of a handful of folks that just kind of have survived all this. And he's taking them into captivity now as well. Who they lead, verse 10?
Poor.
Okay. He left of the poor of the people that had nothing in the land of Judah. He gave them vineyards and fields at the same time. So they had nothing to offer Babylon. So there's no real reason to bring. Remember, when they started leading the initial waves of captives back into Babylon, who were they taking? Right, the craftsmen, skilled people. Okay, Babylon didn't want to deal with folks in a sense that they would have to take care of. They wanted people to be taken captive that could bring something to the table. Think for a moment about Daniel. What did they do with Daniel? And we know at least 3 others, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What was the purpose that they had for them?
Serve in the king's house.
That's right. Let's train them up in the king's palace, and let's see, from a scientific, for lack of a better description, standpoint, in their eyes, from an academic standpoint, can we treat them like Babylonian students and get the same result? Okay, that was what Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego was about. Can we bring them in, educate them, teach them, treat them like Babylonians, and get the same result we get with our own children? And then if you recall, Daniel says, I don't want what? I don't want the food and the king's wine, the things from his table. Give us what? Water and vegetables, basically, and we'll do.
We'll look better.
Yeah, we'll do better than even those that you eat and suck from the king's table. And was that true?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then he rises even further. So keep in mind, all that's going on up here in Babylon, while Jeremiah is still trying to get the rest of the people to submit, and Zedekiah is still resisting. So you've got this kind of twofold pieces of history that kind of overlap one another. So they took the most skilled, the folks they could educate, the folks that could bring something to the table for Babylon. Here at the last wave, there's this, and so they basically say, you guys can what? Stay right here. Here's a vineyard. Okay, here's a means by which for you to survive. And they don't lead everyone back into captivity there.
Do you think that perhaps was a peace offering, Brian?
You know, I suppose there could be lots of thought processes that can go on here. There's, overlapping history a little bit, but I think there's some evidence that Nebuchadnezzar recognized that God, the God of those people, was involved in this. I think that's true, especially when you look and you see when he begins to rebel and he begins to elevate himself, and the whole reason all these things are happening is because of me, and Nebuchadnezzar gets power hungry and he begins to ignore God. God turns him into a wild beast for a while. So yeah, I think that there's a measure maybe here where he's trying to be peaceable with these folks, even though he recognizes the real problems in leadership in all these things. So they take them back, they leave some of the remnant. In verse 15, now the word of Jehovah came to Jeremiah while he was shut up in the court of the guard, saying, Go and speak to Ebed-Melech, the Ethiopian, saying, Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, Behold, I will bring my words upon this city for evil, and not for good, and they shall be accomplished before thee in that day. But I will deliver thee in that day, saith Jehovah, and thou shalt not be given into the hand of the men of whom thou art afraid. For I will surely save thee, and thou shalt not fall by the sword, but thy life shall be for a prey unto thee, because thou hast put thy trust in me. And so, God reminds Jeremiah that we're basically where in this process of time? Yeah, we're at the end. Okay, it's coming. You've been telling them, here it is. Okay, we're there. What's going through Jeremiah's mind?
What's going to happen to me now?
Yeah, what's going to happen to me? He probably feels pretty alone. In his mind, at least at this stage, now we'll learn different here in the next chapter, he'll learn different. But this day, he don't know whether is he going to be able to trust Nebuchadnezzar? Is he going to be treated well by the Babylonians? Are Zedekiah and those that were loyal to him as their kind of their last lash out at Jeremiah that's going to put him to death on their way out of town? There's lots of things that can go through his mind. But God reassures him that yes, the calamity is coming. It's on its way. But all the things that you fear, don't what?
Don't be afraid of it.
Don't be afraid of it. Okay? Don't be afraid of it. And who is all this prophecy for, by the way? Who's he talking to? Them or us? Them. Okay? Don't misunderstand that. Sometimes folks come to Jeremiah and extrapolate way out here in the future. He's talking to them. This is meaningful to them. To Jeremiah, he's the one that's being spoken to. He's the one being told the city is falling. The people around you are facing this calamity. And so, though there are moments in Jeremiah's prophecy that he points to things that will eventually come in Jesus, and we've talked about those texts when we've gotten to them. But God's telling you this is about what's going on in Jerusalem. This city's going to fall. It's not going to be good. But you're going to be delivered, and you're going to have the benefit from all those things. You're not going to die by the sword. And for what reason? Why wouldn't he?
Trust
Trust
God.
Trust him. Because you trusted me. You put your confidences in me, I'm not going to let that go to waste in your mind. I'm going to benefit you because of that. Grab your question sheets if you've got them. I'm using these by way of review, reversing my process a little bit because we're rehashing knowledge that's already been given. How long did the Babylonians surround and cut off the city before entering?
Almost 2 years.
Yeah. Right at, or over 2 years, you would say. We were in the 9th year and a few months, and then we ended up in the 11th year and a few months beyond that. What happened to Zedekiah and his family?
Family was killed.
Family ends up,
Killed.
they die, and he has to what?
To watch.
He had to watch. Those things happen. Who was Nebuzaradan?
Captain of all.
He was captain, and he was the one that was doing what with the resident?
Gathering of the people.
Setting them captive.
Yeah, he's, if for nothing other, we could just say he's finishing off the captivity that's happening. And he leaves a handful of the poor to deal with the vineyards and things that are left there. What's going to happen with Jeremiah?
God's going to protect him.
Taken to his house.
Yeah, we're going to see that. We're going to see eventually that he's going to be allowed to head back to his home place. But God's basically at this stage going to protect him. And no harm is going to befall him because he's done everything he's supposed to do. And what becomes of Abimelech?
He lived. He trusted God.
All right. So, it's kind of strange, all this history and all these things that have finally come to naught, and you wonder in your mind, okay, what's going to happen in your mind? What's going to happen to these men that trusted God? What's going to happen to all these individuals that have been the ones who've been warning the people? And it's kind of a strange, ending, if you will. You can almost wonder what's going through Jeremiah's mind because he's been spending the last several years doing nothing but warning the people about what's happening right now. And so it's kind of an interesting circumstance he's addressing. Particular lessons you might have noted out of that chapter?
God carries out whatever he planned.
Okay. Though it may not have happened in the timing that people thought, God's plan eventually is finished. He made a promise and he upheld what he said was going to happen.
That promise, we can trust him in that promise.
Yeah. And
even act in spite of fear
yeah.
when we trust God.
Yeah. You trusting God even when it's uncomfortable. I mean, you think about all the things that Jeremiah had to experience because he trusted in God through all this time. Trusting in God even when it's uncomfortable is important and brings benefit in the long run. Did it always bring immediate benefit to Jeremiah? Not even close, right? There were lots of challenges that he had to suffer through and difficulties. But because he trusted, he ultimately is rewarded in the end.
I have the regret that Zedekiah must have felt when he was taken away. Knowing the truth is likened to the regret that people are going to have when they know the truth today and they don't follow it in the end.
Yeah, I can't help but think too, Pam, about how when Zedekiah watches all these things unfold and how many times he's been told, how many times he's been told, how many times he's been told. And that reminds me a lot of the way the Bible describes what? Whose judgment? Our judgment. Someday I'm going to stand before God, right? Someday I'm going to have to stand before Him. And I'm going to have to answer as to what I did with my life and the things that I chose and the decisions that I made. And my life is going to flash before my eyes. And I'm going to have to own up and live up to whatever it is I chose. And I can't help but think that there might be a lot of that going on, a lot of regret going on with a lot of people when they have to stand before God in judgment. Zedekiah is standing before a human king. He's standing before Nebuchadnezzar, and you can only imagine what's going through his mind. If I had only, if I had only, if I had only. Well, there'll be a lot of folks, I imagine, standing before God in judgment someday, and in their minds, if I had only, if I had only. And And that's a sad reality. Go ahead, Bob.
I find it interesting that when Nebuchadnezzar made Zedekiah king, his name was Antoniah. They changed it to Zedekiah, which means my Lord is my righteousness. It's kind of like whether God had a little bit of an influence on Nebuchadnezzar naming him that, because it's kind of like sarcastically knowing what his life is like while he was king.
And there's always interesting reasons behind why the renamings occur. All the time. Any other thoughts about that, Jackie? All right, fast forward, chapter 40. Again, another short 16-verse chapter here that we're dealing with. So, word comes to Jeremiah now, but this is after Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, had let him go from Ramah when he had taken him being bound in chains among all the captives of Jerusalem and Judah that were carried away captive into Babylon. So, there's a piece of the puzzle we didn't necessarily see in the prior chapter. Who is Jeremiah with originally when Nebuzaradan begins to take the people out of Jerusalem?
Captives.
Okay, he's with all the other captives. And because he was in prison, what's the natural inclination if you're this person who's now been placed in charge of all these people, what's your natural inclination to think about this man? Okay, I got to treat him like a prisoner. There's some reason. And so the text says that when he had taken him being bound in chains among all the captives of Jerusalem and Judah that were carried away captive unto Babylon, and the captain of the guard took Jeremiah and said to him, Jehovah thy God pronounced this evil upon this place. And Jehovah hath brought it, and done according as he spoke, because you have sinned against Jehovah and have not obeyed his voice. Therefore this thing is come upon you. I want you to think, who is Nebuzaradan again? I'm not trying to insult you. I want you to think about it. Who is he again? He's a captain, and he answers to who? He's a Babylonian, okay? Unless he's been placed in position by Nebuchadnezzar because he's from... But it's interesting because here's a voice that says to Jeremiah everything Jeremiah's been saying all along. It seems to me to be a strange place for it to be coming from. Here's this captain saying, guess what? Your people sinned. They didn't trust their God. They didn't rely upon him as they should. And the captain of the guard took Jeremiah and says to him, Jehovah God pronounced this evil upon this place. Jehovah hath brought it, and done according as he spoke, because you have sinned against Jehovah, and have not obeyed his voice. Therefore this thing is come upon you. Now behold, I loose thee this day from the chains which are upon thy hands. If it seem good unto thee to come with me into Babylon, come, and I will look well unto thee. But if it seem ill unto thee to come with me into Babylon, forbear. Behold, all the land is before thee. Whether it seemeth good and right unto thee to go, thither go. Now, that's some King James version for you there. What's basically he telling Jeremiah?
You can come with me, you can stay here.
Come with me back into Babylon, and we'll take care of you there, or you can go. Your God has brought this challenge upon your people. Your God has brought his judgment. The destruction has come. You were his spokesman. You were the only one, or one of very few that would rely on him. So you've got a choice. You can come back to Babylon with me, or you can basically what?
Stay
Go
here.
wherever you want to go. Okay? You can go whether it seems good or right. He gives him permission to leave and make his decision. Interesting set of circumstances for him, you think about it. I mean, he spent the better part of his life now doing nothing but warning the people about this destruction. And you think about something, when your life was basically dedicated to one moment in time, and now that one moment in time is what? It's come past. And you go, and you do what?
What would they do now?
What do I do now? What do I do now? You can't help but figure that Jeremiah had kind of settled into his lot in life. There were moments, if you recall, as we've studied, where he might have, for lack of a better description, complained about, well, God, why did you do it that way, or why did you do it this way? Why are you continue to put this burden on my shoulders? But he has spent the better part of his life now doing nothing but warning people about this coming judgment. Now it's past, and you can almost see the exhaustion. By the way, he survived from Jerusalem during a besiegement so he's weakened, he's tired, he's been through all of this, and now he's got the decision. Whatever you want to do, you go.
Kind of a letdown too, isn't it?
Well, and a letdown from just a physical and an emotional and spiritual standpoint, because you have been so interconnected to this purpose of trying to turn a nation, and you can, for lack of a better description or definition here, you can't help but figure Jeremiah, after destruction happens, feels like a what? Or feels like he has
Failed.
failed.
I mean, there was no joy in it.
Yeah, there's no pleasure, because everything I tried to do was to get these folks from the leaders on down to turn and repent and start behaving themselves. And you can almost imagine the sadness that has to overcome through all these things. Go ahead, Rob.
Yet, you touched on this briefly, but yet he had to be relieved in some ways that the captain of the guard of the Babylonians was the one who came to him and said, we know what you did. Now you can reap the benefits and you can just make your choice where you want to go.
Right. Because at the end of the prior chapter, he talks about the fact that God says, you don't need to be afraid of the things you're afraid of.
Right.
In other words, God understood the fears that
But
he
he
had.
didn't know until this point
How that
his
was
fate
gonna
was going to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so he chose to stay in his homeland.
But if that being in prison, would that have helped save his life? Because he's away from all the other.
Well, he definitely wouldn't have been in the battles.
Right.
In that sense. And so in some ways it would have given him certain levels of protection.
I'm surprised with all the hunger that they continued to feed him.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd have thought,
Yeah. Well,
but prisoners would be the last of my thought.
yeah. And I don't suppose that they ever really treated him like, that there were some who just disliked him and wanted him dead. I'm not saying that. But I don't know that they ever really viewed him as a legitimate prisoner in that sense, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, and like you said, Zedekiah knew he was telling the truth, so.
Right. He established the rule about making sure he was cared for as best they could. So while he was not yet gone back, verse 5, go back then, said he, to Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, whom the king of Babylon had made governor over the cities of Judah, and dwell with him among the people, or go wheresoever it seemeth right unto thee to go. So the captain of the guard gave him victuals and a present, and let him go. Then went Jeremiah unto Gedaliah the son of Ahikam to Mizpah, and dwelt with him among the people that were left in the land. And so he ends up going where?
Eventually home.
Okay. And ends up Mizpah, but he ends up among whom?
His own people.
Yeah, just some remnant of folks, a residue of folks that were left there in the land. And when all the captains of the forces that were in the fields, even they and their men, heard that the king of Babylon had made Gedaliah the son of Ahikam governor in the land, and had committed unto him men and women and children, and of the poorest of the land, of them that were not carried away captive to Babylon, then they came to Gedaliah to Mizpah, to wit Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, and Johanan and Jonathan the sons of Kareah, and Sariah and the sons of all these other guys, all their men. And Gedaliah, verse 9, the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, swear unto them and to their men, saying, fear not to serve the Chaldeans, dwell in the land, and serve the king of Babylon, and it shall be well with you. Here's the point. Up until this point, all the leaders in Judah had been telling the people to what? Rebel, resist, fight, let's go to war, let's not let Babylon take over. When God had been telling them, submit, behave yourselves, don't resist. This will be a lot easier on you if you just accept it. So now a new governor's been placed over the land. Not the same kind of situation you've seen with the kings, like Zedekiah and Jehoiakim and Uzziah. And so what's his basic message to this residue that gets to stay?
Serve the king with all of your heart.
Just serve the king. Okay, just serve the king, and it'll be fine. You'll survive this. All will be well. As for me, behold, I will dwell at Mizpah to stand before the Chaldeans that shall come unto us. But ye gather ye wine and summer fruits and oil, and put them in your vessels, and dwell in your cities that ye have taken. Likewise, when all the Jews that were in Moab and among the children of Ammon and in Edom that were in all the countries heard that the king of Babylon had left a remnant of Judah, and that he had set over them Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, then all the Jews returned out of all places whither they were driven, and came to the land of Judah to Gedaliah unto Mizpah, and gathered wine and summer fruits very much. In other words, they're doing what?
Coming back home.
How would you,
Back home,
yeah,
taking care of it.
right, they're just living, okay? They're going back to as normal existence as they can. Word begins to spread out to these other regions where people had fled to and ran to. Word is spreading that there's peace in the land again. Nebuchadnezzar has allowed for a governor to reside over the remnant that is there. And so they begin to filter back into the region. And so there's among this residue, among this small remnant, there is a semblance of normalcy that they're encouraged to try to return to. And get your food and begin to try to live and survive again. So all these other captains come there, and they say to Gedaliah in verse 14, Dost thou know that Baalis, the king of the children of Ammon, hath sent Ishmael the son of Nethaniah to take thy life? But Gedaliah the son of Ahikam believed them not. Then Jehonan the son of Kareah spake to Gedaliah in Mizpah secretly, saying, Let me go, I pray thee, and I will slay Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, and no man shall know it. Wherefore should he take thy life, that all the Jews that are gathered unto thee should be scattered, and the remnant of Judah perish? So they've got a decent leader, figuratively here. They've got some peace. They're given the ability to kind of live. And what word do they get?
Somebody's going to kill him.
Somebody's going to come in and disrupt all this. Gedaliah, this Ishmael, he's going to seek your life. And if you allow him to do that, we're just barely getting back on our feet here. And if people begin to sense trouble in the land again, what are they going to do?
Scatter again.
Okay, they're gonna run. Okay, they're skittish. They're not going to trust a lot of things. They've already been down this road, and so his idea is let's just get rid of him. Let me just privately. I can do this. I'll go and privately do away with him. But what's Gedaliah say?
Doesn't believe
It's
it.
not true.
Yeah, I don't believe it. I don't believe that this is true, and I'm not going to act upon something until I can what? Until I can prove it or validate it. Okay. And so there is some wisdom in not just trusting. I mean, there's been enough bloodshed without somebody just making an arbitrary decision to go and seek this man's life based on limited knowledge. Okay. Seems like an odd breaking point, but that's the breaking point that the chapter writers or the chapter dividers give us. Go back to your questions, which there weren't. Were not many coupled for this chapter. Who did Nebuzaradan see was responsible for the fall of Jerusalem?
God.
God, right? That's a very specific statement. So what we appreciate about that is even Babylonian leaders understood something that Judah's leaders refused to understand. Here's these Babylonian leaders, they get it. They got it all along, but God was the one letting them do this. And the Judean leaders didn't get it. Who was the new governor? However it was said, right? It's spelled a couple different ways, and you can see it kind of like this. Becomes the new governor, and people seem to be favorable to him. He seems to be, he's creating some peace among this residue that gets to stay. People are hearing about it, and they're coming back into the land. And so, until you get to this very end of the chapter where there's this situation where we got to decide how we're going to address it. What do you see in this chapter? Things that we can learn from. This one was a little harder for me too.
Well, God's in control.
Okay, same thing we saw earlier in chapter 39. God's still in control, and His purposes are still being fulfilled. What else?
If we serve God and trust Him, He will take care of us,
Yeah.
as He did Jeremiah. And it came in a strange way.
Yeah, if we trust, He'll fulfill His promises to us. And it may not happen like we think it should,
Trust and obey.
but we should trust. That's right. I've alluded to it a couple of times, but I for lack of a better description, to me, it should be embarrassing that Babylonian leaders understood something better than the Judean leaders did. We should be embarrassed when the world grasps spiritual and lives by spiritual concepts and teachings better than the Lord's people do. That ought to be embarrassing to us. When we ought to be diligently seeking the truth of God's Word. And those who aren't necessarily even desirous of serving God seem to grab a better grasp on it than God's children. Anything else you might have seen? Thought of in that text.
You don't think this would go back to, if you remember Abraham when he took Sarah and said it was his sister? I think Isaac did the same thing. That night, God had told them to tell Abraham and Isaac that. You don't think that God's come in there after this to tell these people to go tell Jeremiah in that sense?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know whether they're getting some kind of direct thought from God and you go tell them these things, or my gut says that that there's a sense from the language that this was something they have understood. Whether they got that knowledge direct from God and then drew an understanding and believed it, or how it is they came to that conclusion, I think there probably is some direct knowledge that God is revealing to
I know the
Nebuchadnezzar
other
and
tells
others.
you that God said
Yeah.
something. So I didn't know.
Yeah,
A good leader would help his people.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, chapter 41 then, Lord willing, Sunday morning.